Welcome to Jeffrey Epstein Files. In complex legal matters, one of the most important distinctions is the difference between civil cases and criminal cases. While both operate within the same legal system, they serve fundamentally different purposes and follow different rules. Understanding this distinction is essential when examining cases connected to figures like Jeffrey Epstein, where both civil and criminal proceedings have played a role. At a basic level, the difference lies in who brings the case. In a criminal case, the action is brought by the state. Prosecutors represent the government and pursue charges based on alleged violations of criminal law. In a civil case, the action is brought by individuals or entities. One party files a claim against another, usually seeking compensation or a legal remedy. This leads to different objectives. Criminal cases aim to determine guilt and apply penalties. Civil cases aim to resolve disputes and provide remedies. Another key difference is the standard of proof. In criminal law, the standard is high, beyond a reasonable doubt. This reflects the seriousness of potential penalties, which can include imprisonment. In civil law, the standard is lower, typically, preponderance of the evidence. This means the claim must be more likely true than not. This difference affects how cases are argued and evaluated. There is also a distinction in outcomes. Criminal cases can result in conviction or acquittal, sentencing, including imprisonment or fines. Civil cases can result in financial compensation, settlements, court orders or injunctions. These outcomes reflect different goals within the legal system. Another important factor is procedure. Criminal cases follow strict procedural rules designed to protect the rights of the accused, given the potential consequences. Civil cases also follow rules, but they are generally more focused on resolving disputes between parties. There is also the issue of party roles. In criminal cases, the defendant faces the authority of the state. In civil cases, both sides are typically private parties, each presenting their position to the court. Understanding these distinctions helps clarify why the same set of underlying events can lead to both types of cases, each addressing different aspects of the situation. This leads to a central idea. Civil and criminal cases are not interchangeable, they are parallel legal paths, each with its own structure, purpose, and outcome. One of the most important aspects of understanding civil and criminal law is recognizing that the same underlying events can lead to both types of cases, but for entirely different reasons. This is not unusual. In situations connected to figures like Jeffrey Epstein, a single set of alleged actions can be examined through two separate legal lenses. The key difference lies in purpose. A criminal case is concerned with whether a law has been broken and whether the state can prove guilt. A civil case is concerned with whether harm occurred and whether one party is entitled to a remedy. These are distinct questions. Because of this, the cases proceed independently. Even if they are based on similar facts, a criminal case and a civil case are not required to reach the same outcome. Each follows its own process, rules, and standards of proof. This creates the possibility of different results. For example, a criminal case may not result in a conviction if the high standard of proof is not met. At the same time, a civil case based on the same events may succeed under a lower standard of proof. This difference is built into the system. Another important factor is timing. Criminal cases are often initiated first, especially when authorities determine that alleged actions may violate the law. Civil cases may follow later or proceed in parallel, depending on the circumstances. However, timing can vary. In some instances, civil cases move forward even when criminal proceedings are limited, delayed, or concluded. The two processes are not dependent on each other. There is also the issue of evidence use. Information from one type of case may influence the other, but it is not automatically transferred. Each case must establish its own record, even if similar material is referenced. This reinforces independence. Another key point is party control. In criminal cases, prosecutors decide whether to bring charges. In civil cases, individuals decide whether to file claims. This means that even if a criminal case does not proceed, civil actions can still be pursued. There is also the matter of legal focus. Criminal proceedings center on the actions of the accused in relation to the law. Civil proceedings focus on the relationship between parties and the impact of those actions. This difference shapes how each case is structured. Understanding how the same events can lead to both types of cases leads to a clear conclusion. Civil and criminal cases may share a foundation, but they are separate legal pathways, each designed to address different questions and achieve different outcomes. One of the most critical differences between civil and criminal cases lies in the standard of proof, the level of certainty required for a court to reach a decision. This standard shapes everything. It determines how evidence is evaluated, how arguments are presented, and ultimately how outcomes are decided. Without understanding this distinction, it is difficult to fully grasp why civil and criminal cases can lead to different results, even when based on the same events. In a criminal case, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the highest standard used in the legal system. It requires the prosecution to prove that the defendant committed the alleged crime with a level of certainty that leaves no reasonable doubt in the mind of the judge or jury. This high threshold exists because the consequences, such as imprisonment, are severe. The system is designed to avoid wrongful conviction, even if that means some cases do not result in a guilty verdict. In contrast, a civil case uses a lower standard, often referred to as preponderance of the evidence. This means that the claim must be more likely true than not. Instead of requiring near certainty, the court asks whether the evidence shows that one side's version of events is more convincing than the other's. This difference has major implications. Because the burden of proof is lower in civil cases, it is possible for a court to find in favor of a claimant even when a criminal conviction is not achieved. This is not a contradiction, it is a reflection of different legal thresholds. Another important point is burden of proof placement. In criminal cases, the burden is entirely on the prosecution. The defendant is not required to prove innocence. In civil cases, the burden typically falls on the party bringing the claim, but both sides actively present evidence and arguments. There is also the factor of evidentiary interpretation. The same piece of evidence may be viewed differently under each standard. What is insufficient to meet the high threshold of a criminal case may still be persuasive enough in a civil context. This reinforces the idea that outcomes are standard dependent. Another key element is jury and judicial evaluation. Judges and juries are instructed to apply these standards carefully. Their role is not just to consider the evidence, but to measure it against the required level of certainty. This adds a structured layer to decision-making. Understanding the standard of proof leads to a central conclusion. The difference between civil and criminal cases is not just about procedure, it is about how certainty is defined and required within the legal system. This difference explains why the same set of facts can produce different legal outcomes without inconsistency. While civil and criminal cases may arise from the same underlying events, their outcomes are fundamentally different. These differences reflect the distinct purposes of each legal path and shape what a court is ultimately able to decide. In a criminal case, the outcome centers on guilt or innocence under the law. If the prosecution meets the required standard of proof, the court may issue a conviction. This can lead to penalties such as imprisonment, fines, probation, or other legal sanctions. If the standard is not met, the result is an acquittal. This does not necessarily mean that the event did not occur, it means that the required level of proof was not reached. In a civil case, the outcome is different. Instead of determining criminal guilt, the court decides whether one party is legally responsible for harm or loss. If so, the result may include financial compensation damages, settlements between parties, court orders such as injunctions. These outcomes are focused on resolution and remedy, not punishment. Another key difference is enforcement. Criminal penalties are enforced by the state, reflecting the authority of the legal system to impose sanctions. Civil outcomes, on the other hand, are enforced through legal mechanisms that ensure compliance between parties. There is also the issue of negotiated outcomes. Civil cases often end in settlements, where parties agree to resolve the matter without a full trial. Criminal cases can involve plea agreements, but the process remains under stricter judicial oversight due to the nature of the charges. Another important factor is public versus private impact. Criminal cases are considered offenses against the state or society as a whole. Civil cases are disputes between individuals or entities, even when the issues involved are serious. This distinction shapes how outcomes are framed. There is also the matter of lasting effect. A criminal conviction can carry long-term legal consequences, including a permanent record and restrictions on certain rights. Civil judgments may also have lasting effects, particularly in financial or legal terms, but they operate differently. Another key point is independence of results. A criminal case may result in acquittal, while a civil case based on the same events may result in liability. This is not contradictory. It reflects the different standards and goals of each system. Understanding these differences leads to a clear conclusion. Civil and criminal outcomes are not interchangeable. They represent distinct forms of legal resolution, each designed to address different aspects of a situation. Even when civil and criminal cases are based on the same events, the way evidence is gathered, presented, and evaluated can differ in important ways. These differences shape what reaches the courtroom, and how it is used once there. In both systems, evidence is central. But the rules and expectations surrounding that evidence are not identical. One major distinction is the level of scrutiny. In criminal cases, evidence is subject to stricter standards. Because the consequences can include imprisonment, courts apply rigorous rules to ensure that evidence is reliable, properly obtained, and fairly presented. This includes detailed procedures for how evidence is collected, strict limits on what can be admitted, strong protections against improper influence. In civil cases, the rules still apply, but they are often less restrictive. The focus is on whether the evidence helps establish which side's claim is more convincing. This allows for a broader range of material to be considered, as long as it meets basic legal standards. Another important factor is discovery. Civil cases typically involve an extensive discovery process, where both parties exchange information before trial. This can include documents, communications, and depositions. This process is often wider in scope than in criminal cases. In criminal proceedings, prosecutors must disclose evidence, but the process is more structured and tied to protecting the rights of the accused. There is also the issue of evidence origin. In criminal cases, law enforcement agencies play a central role in gathering evidence. Their methods must comply with strict legal requirements. In civil cases, evidence is often collected by the parties themselves, through legal requests and investigative efforts. Another key point is admissibility standards. Certain types of evidence that may be allowed in civil court could be excluded in criminal court if they do not meet higher reliability or procedural standards. This reflects the different levels of risk and consequence. There is also the role of expert testimony. Both systems may use experts to interpret evidence, but the standards for accepting expert opinions can differ depending on the case and jurisdiction. Another important factor is presentation strategy. In criminal cases, the prosecution must build a case strong enough to meet a high burden of proof. In civil cases, both sides focus on persuasion and balance, presenting evidence to show that their version of events is more likely. There is also the issue of evidence weight. The same piece of evidence may carry different significance depending on the case type. What is insufficient in a criminal trial may still contribute meaningfully in a civil one. Understanding these differences leads to a key conclusion. Evidence is not just about what exists, it is about how that evidence is handled within the rules of each legal system. These rules shape what is seen, what is excluded, and how decisions are ultimately made. Another fundamental difference between civil and criminal cases lies in who the parties are and how they operate within the legal process. These roles shape how each case is built, argued, and resolved. In a criminal case, the central parties are the state prosecution, the defendant. The prosecution represents the government and brings charges based on alleged violations of the law. Their role is to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant, on the other hand, is the individual facing those charges. They are not required to prove innocence. The legal system places the burden entirely on the prosecution. This creates a one-sided burden structure. In contrast, a civil case involves a plaintiff, the party bringing the claim, a defendant, the party responding to the claim. Here, both sides actively present arguments, evidence, and legal reasoning. The plaintiff must establish their claim, but the defendant also participates in challenging and countering that claim. This creates a more balanced adversarial dynamic. Another key difference is control over the case. In criminal proceedings, the decision to bring or dismiss charges rests with the state. Even if individuals are directly affected, they do not control whether a criminal case proceeds. In civil cases, the plaintiff has significantly more control. They decide whether to file a case, what claims to bring, and whether to settle or continue litigation. This gives civil cases a more party-driven structure. There is also the issue of representation and rights. In criminal cases, defendants are guaranteed certain protections, including the right to legal representation. These protections reflect the seriousness of potential penalties. In civil cases, representation is still important, but the structure is less focused on constitutional protections and more on procedural fairness between parties. Another important factor is objective alignment. In criminal cases, the prosecution's objective is to enforce the law and secure a conviction if the evidence supports it. In civil cases, each party's objective is to advance their own legal interest, whether that is compensation, defense, or resolution. This difference influences how arguments are framed. There is also the matter of decision-making influence. In civil cases, parties may negotiate and settle disputes directly. In criminal cases, while plea agreements exist, the process remains under judicial control and must meet strict legal standards. Understanding these roles leads to a key conclusion. The structure of a case is defined not only by the law, but by who is involved and what responsibilities they carry. Civil and criminal cases assign different roles, different burdens, and different levels of control, shaping the entire direction of each proceeding. Beyond purpose, evidence, and party roles, another key distinction between civil and criminal cases lies in how they unfold over time. The timeline and procedural flow of each type of case follow different rhythms, shaped by their objectives and legal requirements. In a criminal case, the process is typically more structured and sequential. It often follows a defined path: investigation by authorities, filing of charges, initial hearings and procedural steps, trial if the case proceeds that far, verdict and, if applicable, sentencing. Each stage is governed by strict rules designed to protect the rights of the defendant and ensure due process. This creates a regulated timeline. While delays can occur, the structure is generally fixed, with clearly defined procedural checkpoints. In a civil case, the timeline is often more flexible. Although civil litigation also follows a structured process, the pace can vary significantly depending on the complexity of the dispute, the amount of evidence involved, the strategies of the parties, court scheduling and procedural motions. This leads to a variable timeline. Civil cases may move quickly if resolved early, or extend over long periods if disputes continue through multiple stages. Another major difference is the role of discovery. In civil cases, discovery can be extensive and time-consuming. Parties exchange documents, conduct depositions, and gather information before trial. This phase alone can shape the overall timeline. In criminal cases, disclosure also occurs, but it is more structured and limited compared to civil discovery. There is also the issue of pre-trial resolution. Civil cases frequently settle before reaching trial. Negotiation and agreement between parties can bring a case to a close at almost any stage. In criminal cases, plea agreements may occur, but the process remains more tightly controlled by legal standards and judicial oversight. Another key factor is urgency and priority. Criminal cases, due to their potential consequences, are often given procedural priority within the court system. Civil cases may not receive the same level of urgency, particularly when they involve complex or large-scale disputes. There is also the matter of appeals and continuation. Both civil and criminal cases can move into appellate stages, but the pathways and timelines differ depending on the nature of the case and the issues being challenged. Understanding these differences leads to a clear conclusion. Civil and criminal cases do not just differ in purpose. They also operate on different timelines, with distinct procedural flows that influence how quickly and how thoroughly each case develops. Another major difference between civil and criminal cases is how much of the process becomes visible to the public. While both operate within the same legal system, the level of access, openness, and information disclosure can vary significantly. In general, courts operate under a principle of public access. This means that many hearings, filings, and outcomes are available for review. However, the degree of transparency depends on the type of case and the nature of the information involved. In criminal cases, transparency is often emphasized. Because these cases involve the authority of the state and potential deprivation of liberty, There is a strong interest in ensuring that proceedings are open and accountable. Trials are typically public, and key decisions are part of the official record. This supports oversight. However, even in criminal cases, there are limits. Certain information may be restricted to protect witnesses, preserve the integrity of proceedings, or comply with legal protections. This means that while the process is generally open, it is not entirely unrestricted. In civil cases, transparency is more variable. Some filings and hearings are publicly accessible, but others may be sealed by court order, partially redacted, resolved privately through settlement. This creates a more controlled level of visibility. Another key factor is party influence over disclosure. In civil litigation, the parties themselves may request that certain information remain confidential. Courts can approve these requests if they meet legal standards. This is less common in criminal cases, where the public interest plays a larger role in maintaining openness. There is also the issue of document accessibility. Civil cases often produce large volumes of filings, not all of which receive public attention. Even when documents are available, their complexity can limit how widely they are understood. In criminal cases, key moments, such as charges, trials, and verdicts, tend to be more clearly defined and publicly visible. Another important point is redaction and privacy. Both civil and criminal cases use redactions to protect sensitive information. However, the reasons and extent of redaction may differ depending on the case type. This affects what the public can actually see within the documents. There is also the role of timing. Information may become public at different stages. Some material is accessible immediately, while other documents are released later, sometimes after the conclusion of proceedings. This creates staggered transparency. Understanding these differences leads to a key conclusion. Public access to legal information is not uniform. It is shaped by the type of case, the interests involved, and the legal rules governing disclosure. Civil and criminal cases both contribute to the public record, but they do so in different ways and at different levels of visibility. The differences between civil and criminal cases do not remain confined to the courtroom. They also shape how each type of case is understood by the public. Because the two systems operate with different goals, standards, and levels of visibility, they often produce different perceptions, even when based on similar events. One of the most important factors is expectation. In criminal cases, the public often expects a clear outcome, guilt or innocence. The structure of the process, charges, trial, verdict, supports this expectation. In civil cases, the outcome is less absolute. Instead of a binary result, civil proceedings focus on responsibility, compensation, or resolution. This can make outcomes appear less definitive, even though they are legally significant. Another key issue is standard of proof awareness. The higher burden in criminal cases is not always fully considered in public interpretation. When a criminal case does not result in conviction, it may be seen as a complete resolution. However, as discussed earlier, a civil case may still proceed under a different standard. This creates interpretive tension. There is also the influence of visibility. Criminal cases tend to have clearer public milestones, arrests, charges, trials, and sentencing. These moments shape public understanding. Civil cases, on the other hand, may unfold more quietly, with filings, motions, and settlements that receive less consistent attention. This can lead to uneven awareness. Another important factor is narrative framing. Public discussion often simplifies complex legal processes into more direct narratives. In doing so, the distinctions between civil and criminal law may become blurred. This can result in misunderstandings about what a case outcome actually represents. There is also the role of timing. If a criminal case concludes before a civil case, public perception may solidify early, without incorporating later developments. When civil outcomes emerge later, they may be interpreted without full context. This creates a layered timeline of understanding. Another key point is interpretive bias toward visibility. Information that is more visible, such as courtroom proceedings or widely reported decisions, tends to carry more weight in public perception. Less visible elements, even if legally important, may receive less attention. This affects how the overall situation is understood. There is also the distinction between legal meaning and public meaning. Legally, civil and criminal outcomes serve different purposes and operate under different rules. Public interpretation, however, may treat them as directly comparable, even when they are not. Understanding these dynamics leads to a key conclusion. Civil and criminal cases are not only different in structure, they are also perceived differently, based on visibility, expectations, and interpretation. Recognizing these differences is essential for understanding what each type of case actually represents. After examining purpose, standards of proof, evidence, party roles, timelines, transparency, and public perception, a clear conclusion emerges. Civil and criminal cases are not competing systems. They are complementary parts of a single legal framework. They serve different functions. Criminal law is designed to address violations against the state and enforce legal boundaries through penalties. Civil law is designed to resolve disputes between parties and provide remedies for harm. These functions operate in parallel. At every stage, the two systems apply different filters. Purpose determines what question is being asked. Standard of proof defines how certainty is measured. Evidence rules shape what can be presented. Party roles influence how arguments are made. Procedure and timelines control how cases develop. Transparency rules determine what becomes visible. Each of these elements creates a distinct pathway. This leads to an important insight. The same set of events can be examined through two independent legal processes, each producing outcomes that reflect its own structure and standards. This is not duplication, it is division of function. Another key distinction is between guilt and liability, punishment and remedy, state action and private action. Criminal cases address whether a law has been broken and whether penalties should be applied. Civil cases address whether harm occurred and how it should be resolved. Understanding this separation prevents misinterpretation. An outcome in one system does not automatically determine the outcome in the other. Each operates within its own rules and reaches conclusions based on its own criteria. There is also the role of interaction without dependence. Civil and criminal cases may influence one another through shared information or timing, but neither is required to follow the result of the other. This reinforces their independence. Another important factor is completeness through combination. Neither system alone provides a full picture. Criminal cases focus on legal violations, while civil cases explore responsibility and impact. Together, they create a more comprehensive legal response. There is also the matter of interpretation. Public understanding often merges these systems, expecting consistent outcomes across both. However, the legal system is designed to allow different conclusions under different standards. Recognizing this is essential. In conclusion, civil and criminal cases should be understood as distinct but connected legal processes, structured around different goals and standards, capable of producing different outcomes without contradiction, essential components of a broader system of justice. They do not tell the same story. But together, they explain how the legal system evaluates actions, assigns responsibility, and determines consequences across multiple dimensions. The documents exist. The questions remain. This channel will continue examining what is public, and what is still hidden. If you value documented analysis over speculation, consider subscribing. More files coming.